Hello and welcome to another instalment of the Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etches Adokru. On today's episode, in the fallout from the ESL scandal, European Super League, we'll be looking at whether football is still a working class game or if the traditional fan is now priced out of the game. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at Yfootball_ and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, and YouTube. Etches, how are you? Have you got over the defeat midweek for Arsenal, or do you think it was a good result in the end?
Uh, yeah. Hey, Dran, how you doing? That's a
Yeah, not bad.
really interesting question. So what it was, I was at Box Park Shoreditch with a friend, and I didn't actually know the game was going to be on there, and it's really, really hard to describe to people that haven't been to Shoreditch Box Park, but there was like a screen in front of me, like a window, and
Mm.
if I looked in the window, I could see the reflection of the match in the distance,
Oh no,
and yeah, but there's no commentary. I
good
could just see the
viewing.
screen. Yeah, and basically a guy started dancing around early doors. So I thought, fucking hell, Arsenal, we scored. And it was actually Villarreal scoring. So that guy I hated immediately. Uh, asked for security to remove him. That didn't happen. So
Oh really? Oh,
yeah, yeah.
a shame.
Apparently we played terrible. I actually missed the match because of it. Because I promised this person that I wouldn't watch the game, which was one of our most important games of the season. So I was quite conflicted. From what I've seen and what I've read, we were absolutely abysmal. So to come away with a 2-1 loss, crucial away goal, I think we're very, very lucky. Looking at the team now, actually, we've got Newcastle in an hour. It's 1 p.m. in the UK, and I've just seen Willian in the starting lineup. So I'm going to close my laptop and scream.
Yeah, I'll see you next week. Yeah, Arsenal midweek. It wasn't a good game. They weren't great. For some reason, I chose to watch Arsenal and missed the United Roma game, which was a cracker.
It
Um,
was.
but yeah, I mean, Arsenal weren't great. I mean, they were 2-0 down at one stage. They were Villarreal were almost cruising, but the coming away with 2-1 in the end was actually a great result for Arsenal. That was actually a cracking result considering Ceballos got sent off as well. It was, but yeah, I mean, when you're referring to that guy in the in Box Park, I went to a pub. It was like near Earlsfield last weekend, and it was like the Tottenham game was on, and there was
Mm.
loads of Chelsea fans there. And when City scored, they were absolutely buzzing. So I don't know if the person you're referring to is like a Chelsea fan or a Tottenham fan who's just there like chanting against or like celebrating against Arsenal. But there was so many people doing that, and I said, I just don't think I would do that. If I was in a pub and like if Newcastle were getting beat, I wouldn't just start cheering and dancing on the table. I don't
Yeah.
really care about them losing that much.
No, you just be afraid of your head getting kicked in, I think.
Yes, yes, that is very true. And there was a lot of people in that pub who definitely would kick my head in. So
So yeah, kind of moving on to today's topic, the question kind of which follows on from the whole ESL thing was, is football a working class game? So
mm,
it's quite an interesting one because we discussed about how UEFA is crooks and Platini is like the worst guy in the world, and like Sepp Blatter was just like a crook and horrible, and there's so much corruption and all the greed and all the negative stuff that came with the Super League and how bad it was. But the one thing which really caught my
mm,
mind in the media was James Corden about like, yeah, football's a working class game, and that was kind of banded on by like a load of people, and football's roots is from the working class. That's a well-known fact compared to sports like cricket and rugby,
mm.
which have been upper class games. But the question I really wanted to look at is it still a working class game? You look at the money in the game now, where you've got players worth 200 million pounds, and you've got little kids like, I can't even think of an example. Like something small, like a player costing £5 million. You never really
Yeah,
think about it, but like, what?
that's
Just
nothing
that,
now as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
the actual concept of like someone being 5 million is just mad. So that's kind of what I wanted to look into this week. What does it even mean to be working class in the 21st century? All these questions I hope to answer on this pod.
Yeah, I think when we discuss this topic, we kind of mean is it still accessible for everyone? And by everyone, that does typically mean the lower kind of socio-economic members of society. Because obviously, if you've got money, then you can typically access most things.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we're talking about. And yeah, to get back to the ESL to an extent, the crosshairs have, I think anyway, recently, but in the press anyway this week, and I've seen a lot of tweets. The crosses have kind of moved from Agnelli, Perez, Woodward, all the bad guys of the ESL, and now seems to be like set on the EPL on the Premier League. I've
Mm,
seen a lot of tweets saying how like, oh, the Premier League is unfair, and like the wealth inequality, not just within the Premier League itself and to the Football League, but compare the Premier League with, say, Serie A. I saw a lot of tweets around how Roma's revenue is a quarter um, yearly of Manchester United's, which I thought was unfair to an extent doing that
Mm.
comparison. Because I mean, how many times? I mean, Roma have been in the Champions League a lot in the last, say, 20 years, but they've only won like one Scudetto since they changed the turn of millennium, I believe. So it's quite an unfair comparison. However, if you did compare Juve to United, for example, there probably would be a big gulf. But I just thought that was interesting how now everyone stopped hating the ESL because it stopped happening, and now the crosshairs have been turned on the Premier League. But I just think it's just I think there's a lot of people in football just like to pretend that the game isn't fundamentally flawed from a financial perspective, and then just like focus on one thing at the Premier League and say, okay, if we stop the Premier League from being so rich, the whole footballing world would be fixed. But actually, that's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah,
So,
that's just not the case, really, is it? So the first question I kind of wanted to look at is what actually is the working class in society, and by googling it, it was really difficult to find an answer, which kind of feeds into my point that depending on
mm,
who you ask, they have a different answer for it. But generally, it's generally seen as a low skill paid job that requires minimal skill, but that can vary as well. So
yeah,
you see people that worked in factories or dockyards beforehand, and now in the modern day, it looks like maybe a shop floor assistant, which I wouldn't say is low skill because I used to do it, and it was a very difficult job indeed. So back to the point of, is football a working class game?
Yeah, I mean, we're in society now. When we talk about working class, it just means people with less money, doesn't it? Because
Yeah,
we're no longer in a manufacturing kind of industry; we're in a kind of service industry. So
yep.
you have less factories, sort of mills, things like that, where people are
Mm.
working. We are just talking about people with less money, and therefore, is it accessible? Is the game accessible? Can they afford to play, and can they afford to be a fan? I think it's two different points which we'll come on to. And I think in the game, there's certain players that are kind of defined as being from a working class background. So someone like Lionel Messi is the classic example, obviously regarded as arguably the best player of all time. People talk about how he played football in the streets of Rosario and is now, this wealthy, great footballer. Same with Neymar, same with Ronaldo, same with Rooney. I mean, the English game, he is the guy that you say is, synonymous with that kind of working class background. Even someone like Beckham, to an extent. I mean, there's always that. Uh, you used to have posters of Manchester United on his small bedroom. They took him up to Manchester to play and became a superstar. I think that's kind of
Mm.
that's where this comes from. I think a lot of the time. But as you will come on to, the game has moved on so much from those days, even the '90s.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, football made a separation from rugby way back in the 1800s, and the sports haven't come together since. And it's
Mm.
during that time, before it became professional, when it did become professional, or is always seen as a game amongst the working class of society, in terms of accessibility and also cost, and just generally, you can identify with it because a lot of these sports, even something like rugby, isn't particularly expensive to start playing, but it's the
Yeah.
identity behind it. 5 of the 12 founding members of the Football League were from mill towns,
Mm.
the Manchester Shipping Canal and the coal mines, as well. Clubs like Accrington, Blackburn, Bolton, Preston, and Burnley, all their populations back then were dramatically filled with loads of people way back when because of the mills.
Yeah.
The county of Lancashire provided half of the founding members of the Football League, and that's kind of where this working class identity derived from when
Yeah.
the Football League was actually founded back in the 1800s. So,
Mm.
even later on during that period of time, tickets were cheaper, stadiums were massive, but not structurally groundbreaking. Like, the new Tottenham stadiums, like, oh, you can pour your own pint by putting it on this like little table and it fills up automatically. Or like, do you know what I mean? Or do you know what I mean?
Oh
Or the
gosh.
Emirates is like, oh, we've got padded seats everywhere. Back then, it was like old school stadiums, standing areas where it would cram in as many people as possible, and you could really identify, I think, yourself with your club back then. There was a real closeness between
Yeah.
playing staff and fans, which is so hard to do. Like I love, like, okay, Patrick Vieira. He has no idea who I am. So, but back then with your local team, the local players could know you if you're regulars at the stadium or the ground. But the way the game is now, that's very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, people have telling me that Spurs have got the longest bar in football. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what beer they're selling. Like, I really don't care. Like, that's not really what the game's about. Like, getting hot dogs to your seat. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, but ticket costs £100. Yeah, brilliant. There's so Ayson Park, that Middlesbrough's old ground before they moved to the Riverside Stadium. They used to have an end called the one bob end because it was one bob to get in. I don't actually know what one bob is, but it sounds like a small amount of money. A small amount of money. But back then, tickets were cheap. There was fewer restrictions on like standing capacity. Like Sunderland against Newcastle had a record capacity at Roker Park of like 75,000. it's,
Yeah.
it's mad. Um, and so you could get in for cheap. These grounds were typically built within cities or suburbs, so they're easy to get to. There wasn't really the transport cost. I mean, you compare that with a modern stadium, it's typically built outside of towns and cities because it's more expensive, because it's expensive in cities, so it's cheaper to build outside. There's then a transport cost to get there. You've got to drive there, and the whole thing is just a completely different experience. I mean, look at the AFC Wimbledon fiasco. I mean, this was like what you're talking like 25 years ago since
Mm,
the whole fiasco of them nearly moving to Dublin and eventually moving up to Milton Keynes, which is still the most bizarre story ever. But I mean, one of the drivers behind that is because Wimbledon is an incredibly expensive place to build a football stadium,
yeah.
and so they tried to move it, and that's like that's how football has changed and moved on because you don't get grounds just in the middle of suburbs or in the city centres anymore because it's just too expensive.
I really want to know what one bob is worth.
One Bob.
Really?
I hope no Middlesbrough fans are listening because there's a good chance I could have got that wrong. But I've been reading Brian Clough's. Jonathan Wilson's done a biography of Brian Clough that I'm currently reading, and I read it in there. So he's a very good source of information. So if anyone wants to
So,
ask
so
him on that,
basically, you're shunning the responsibility onto what's the name, Jonathan Wilson.
I assume he's not listening. So yeah.
Nice, very very good. So kind of moving on to like the modern era, in terms of fans and whether it's still a working class game as we've discussed earlier. You know, as I said earlier, singular men like Neymar's transfer fee alone. I don't think to the day I die I'll earn as much money as that. The concept of men costing 5, 10, 15, 30 million pounds is just mad. And I think that the amount of money in the game, which is why I've kind of said from the 80s onwards, is because that's when, big money started to enter football. It's in
Yeah.
particular the 90s. And, you mentioned like how pundits, and reporters were saying, what about the fans when it comes to the Super League? And, oh, it's going to destroy the Premier League. It will destroy
Mm.
football. But when you ask that question again, what about the fans? Right? Let's apply it to Arsenal. Like Arsenal, I'm mentioning it about 10 times per pod every minute or so.
Mm.
The most expensive season ticket is £2,000, with the cheapest coming in at 800. Chelsea's is 1.25k for the most expensive, 595 for the cheapest. Tottenham's is basically 1.9k for the most expensive,
Mad.
795
£2,000.
for the cheapest, which is an expense in itself. Okay, to see some Category A fixtures at Arsenal, so you have Category A, B, and C, and I think you've got Cup. A is like your top tier Man United, Chelsea games. You're looking at about £80 plus in some cases for an average price ticket there. There'll be more expensive ones for sure in the hundreds. Cheaper, lower tier Prem games of Arsenal player, Sunderland, so obviously like a second tier team, not very good.
Third
You're
tier.
looking you're looking at about £45 or so. And away from football, in particular in London, which is more of a focus for me because obviously I can relate to it. There's always
Mm.
a talk about rising costs. So it actually affects London, but also everywhere around the country, but maybe not as quickly. Where wages aren't matching living costs. So when we say football is a working class games, you have to look at working class jobs, right? So
Yeah.
how feasible is it for someone on 18 or 18 to 21k to part with, let's say, £160 a month watching Arsenal when you have to factor in rent, food, and
Yeah.
bills? Obviously there are shop floor assistants that are living at home and whatever, but for some people that's their main income and they have to survive. They might have children as well. Even if you're up to 21k a year, that's about 1.5k a month. And in London, you're looking at 700 in rent. So you're already down to £800 a month.
Yeah.
You got foods, let's say £50 a week, so 600 without factoring bills, phone contracts, etc. The match day itself is expensive. The hot dogs at Arsenal stink and they're
There's a lot
expensive.
of hot dogs at Arsenal.
There are a lot of hot dogs at Arsenal. Traveling to and from the games, like home games. Okay, you could get, let's say, if you're in London, it'll be a five or a tenner. But if you're coming in from elsewhere on the national rail, you're going to get
Yeah.
sold an absolute hot dog.
Speaking of hot dogs,
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to go on about how ridiculous train prices are, but that's another part of it as well.
yeah, that's some strong maths there. To be fair, working out the budget, but and your calculations as well. That's factored in a single person going to game. What happens if going to a game? What happens if you're taking your partner and two kids?
Yeah.
It's just, like you got train, you got food, you got drinks, you got match day ticket, you got merchandise. It's so much money. I work with a Chelsea fan, and she's a big Chelsea fan, but she takes her kids normally to Charlton, and to Chelsea basically as a treat whenever they can,
Mm,
because the Chelsea deal for her, she's got 3 kids and she goes with her husband. So 5 of them getting tickets and then getting the train, and obviously they're paying for the kids, paying for food. The food kids need to eat. they need
mm.
to they want stuff. They want sweets, drinks. They might want merchandise. It costs hundreds and hundreds of pounds on the day, and it's just for a Saturday afternoon going to a football game, and it might be a bad game. They might get beat. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. I mean, obviously, yeah, you get nothing for free. I do get that. I discussed this on the ESL podcast we did last week. Like, you can't expect this to enjoy this product that is the Premier League as it is, and it'd be free. Oh, it'd be £10 a ticket. Yeah, you can't expect that. But it's so much money, and that's why a lot of like families, and particularly in London, go to places like Charlton, for example, where it's cheaper and perhaps it's more local to them than Chelsea, for example, and which I mean it depends where they live, but
Mm.
because it's cheaper and it's just more accessible.
No, I completely agree with you. And even looking at things, so we mentioned obviously taking the family and kids. What about the kits? So you want to put your 2 kids in the latest Arsenal jersey. I think kids tops are about £40 or £30 a head. All these clubs, why do they? The clubs now send authentic match day tops, right? Which is meant to be what the
Yeah.
players wear for £100. Why? Why are you like? Why are you like? Forget. Okay, that's a slightly different point. I just had to put this in because it just angers me. It's like, oh yeah, I want to wear the top that Aubameyang wears when he plays for Arsenal. No, mate, it's £100.
Yeah.
Don't care. But it feeds into the point, right? Where even a standard adult jersey is now about £60. You know, these are fees and amounts that drive the working class out of the game or leave them with heavy holes in their pockets because it's so expensive. Even moving away from clubs, you have Gary Lineker smiling, be like, "Yeah, fans won, and we've destroyed the Super League." It's like, have we? Have we destroyed the main issue in football, which is TV subscriptions? They're extortionate. To have Sky Beats is a luxury for many families. Loads of my friends didn't have it growing up. I was fortunate to have it in my teens, and then to have the sports package on top of it, because Sky don't just give you Sky Sports for free. You have to buy the package as well.
Mm.
That costs money. The amount of paywalls in front of people now to be able to
Yeah.
see some of their favorite players, even if they can't go to the stadium. So let's say, okay, can't go to the stadium. It's too expensive for my 2 kids and my wife. Let's watch it at home. But to pay for Sky is expensive. We grew up in an era on TV where we had ITV Champions League in England on BBC and ITV. Now that's changed. I know England are
Yeah.
sometimes on BBC, but often their Euro qualifiers are all on Sky, where you have to pay
Mm.
for that as well.
Nations League. Yeah.
Exactly. Even the papers, I love the Athletic, but what they've gone and done is right. Okay, so David Ornstein, all of these reporters for a variety of publications that were all free. Let's put them behind another paywall, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, great. So now my 20 favorite reporters, I now have to pay to see them, and it all feeds into my point where there's so many restrictions in place that doesn't make it accessible for the working class within our society to actually watch football, let alone at the stadiums, but just to physically watch it. I mean, the only thing that they can really do is go onto like Ronaldo7.com and illegally stream it, and you get
Classic.
bombarded with loads of adverts and pop-ups, which I won't really go into.
I love how the Athletic were absolutely slating the Super League. They are the Super League of journalism.
They are.
They've just taken everyone's favorite, as you said, reporters, journalists, and make them pay for it. And it's all great, these subscriptions. I mean, we're getting away from football a bit here, but like, yeah, oh yeah, it's only 9.99 a month. Well, everything is 9.99 a month. It's going to get to a point where go back to your budget. I'm going to have nothing left at the end of the, end of the month.
Mm.
I'm not going to be able to eat because I'm paying for all these subscriptions for everything, because everything is becoming just more expensive, and it's becoming pay per view. And yeah, you can't get things for free, but at the same time, like, people are just getting like squeezed for the cash. Like, and I suppose this overall topic, there are, as I mentioned briefly earlier, I think there are two sides to it. Like, we talk about accessibility for the working class. We've talked about it mainly from a fan point of view. You've got to think from two angles. You've got, is the game still accessible as a player, and is it
Mm.
still accessible as a fan? I think as a player, it is still quite accessible. And we talked about comparing to other sports, something like cricket, and this is not a new thing. It is more expensive to play because you have to be able to, buy the pads, buy the bats. These are all expensive helmets, all these different things that you need to basically play the game. And also, um, these are not things that you can typically play on your own. So it's kind of getting to a more of a point about football generally being so popular. But with football, you can buy a football. It's not too expensive. You can get affordable boots, even though some boots now are really expensive, and some footballs. but you can get affordable boots. You can get an affordable football, and in theory, you can go out and play on your own, or you can play with friends on quite a cheap basis. You can join football teams. You have subs. You have transport costs. You do have the factors that if you do have someone from a lower working class background, lower socioeconomic background, parents might be working a lot, might not have the time to take them to games. Yeah, these are all barriers. It's still not expensive to join football teams. Really, it's not like as difficult. So as for a playing perspective, it is like accessible, I believe. But from a fan's perspective, it's just so much money, and they're actually people are getting priced out. And Perez is talking about why, or how the youth don't want to watch football anymore. It's because they can't afford to. If their parents don't want
Mm.
to pay for it, if their parents aren't football fans, don't want to pay for it, well, they're not going to be able to watch it. So it's all well and good Perez saying that, but he's part of the problem. His club is part of the problem. You know, I'm talking about the ESL. Daddy, can I go to an away game this season? Oh, it's going to be in Madrid. Yeah, it's going to be cheap. Let's go to the Wanda Metropolitano, Atleti's new stadium. Yeah, flight to hotel. Yeah, match day ticket. That's going to be cheap, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's making the
exactly.
game more accessible. It's just part. They're all part of the problem. It's just I find it deplorable, really.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong because some of our European counterparts are really good with their ticketing and their pricing for games,
Mm.
but obviously for people in England, yeah, you have to get there. So it's like, yeah, okay, let's go to Wolfstadion in Germany. Okay, well, how much is it going to cost to go to Germany and then
Oh
accommodation and
yeah,
all that
yeah,
sort of
and,
stuff?
those Super League tickets aren't going to be cheap.
No, they're not. They're not. They're certainly not. And it's kind of like how can you actually change that? And it's not really a question which is being discussed in football at all because I think a lot of fans are kind of they're quite accepting of it and they're quite deluded in a way because as I said earlier, everyone's got their arms folded, chuffed with their chest puffed out because they defeated the Super League. But actually, this growing problem in football has been about for decades and is only
Mm.
getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, Arsenal's biggest season ticket now is 2K. It will be 3K in about 7-8 years.
Yeah.
It'll be 5K by the time I'm 40. Like, it's not really going to end. And you know, private broadcasters are off limits because you can't say to Sky, "Oh, it's got to be for the fans," because that's not what their business model was ever about. It's nothing
Mm.
to do with fans. They're a business trying to get profits, capitalism at its finest. But I think what the ESL has highlighted is that if fans truly care about a cause, they can alter the minds of clubs and government.
Yeah.
Um, we've got Boris Johnson coming out saying, we're putting in regulations in place so that clubs can't leave the ESL. Funnily enough, this is the final point I'm going to make on Boris Johnson, the ESL. The ESL clubs actually met with him and he originally backed it. But obviously,
Yeah. Oh God.
for publicity, he came out running like Batman to start saying, yeah, we can't do it, all this sort of stuff. But the point I'm trying to get at is that we could put legislations in place as a government or with fans to try and change it. We've reached a state in the game, I think now, where the game has lost its link to those it originally aimed to serve, which is the fans. You put these clubs weren't made for profit. As you said, like when you
Mm.
play at your local team, you don't play for profit because it's obviously it's non-league and you don't get any money for it. You play for enjoyment and for the fans to enjoy it. But as the years have gone on and decades have gone on, that's kind of been lost. And we're now at a stage where these football clubs care about profit.
Mm.
And fans should realize that they have the ability to change that, if they want to, in their masses by complaining and protesting. But I don't think they do it often enough. I know Liverpool did. I think fans are complaining about ticket prices there, and Liverpool backed down. So these things can happen. But I also think that the people that we're talking about have already been driven out the game, right? A lot
Mm.
of these people were saying of the working class, a lot of the time it's a treat. They can't afford, and it shouldn't be a treat. If you love your club, you should be able to go if tickets are available every single week.
Yeah.
But I think for the many people that we're discussing, football is already a treat for them. It's the one game, or if not, it's an illegal stream because it is too expensive to
Mm.
watch and follow.
No, I think fans are they're just not important football clubs anymore to an extent. I mean, overall viewership is because that's part of the TV deals. If no one watches the games on TV, then these TV deals will be less. They'll get more money. Sorry, less money. Um, but in 1960, if no one showed up to Ayresome Park, for example, the one Bob End, if no one showed up, then the players didn't get paid. The club would go bust. But now, I mean, I know a lot of clubs are losing money during COVID for a number of reasons. One of them reasons is because grounds are empty, but football is still going on and it is still moving forwards. I've got problems with the EFL clubs struggling, etc. But football's changed now. It's not about football anymore. It's about it's about sponsorships, about commercial deals. I mean, look how much money Manchester United make from commercial deals. they've got like sponsorships for like they've got like what was it I saw on Twitter? It was like I think you mentioned they've got they used to have an official like sleep partner. Was it
Yeah,
like a
yeah, 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 yeah. They're like partnered up with like
what?
Dreams mattresses or something absolutely wild.
What? And like, yeah, it's like so. I just the point is, and we had a discussion actually with some of our friends recently, didn't we, about what makes someone actually a true fan. Football has changed. Audiences are wider. I want Sunderland to be the best club in the world. So for Sunderland to be the best club in the world, they can't just have fans within 10-mile radius of the stadium, can they? They can't. So therefore, they need to have viewers that are overseas, and therefore, what makes a true fan anymore, inverted commas, has changed. The game has changed, but I just think the local fan or just the fan generally, I just don't think clubs really care about them anymore. And so this whole
Nah.
idea, as you said about Lineker, talking about how it's fan power, is it fan power? I'm just not too certain it is. Like it's pressure from more than just the fans, and it's just yeah, it stings. I mean, Lineker does sting a bit on Twitter, I must say.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you said that because I was literally about to say that I need to start referencing Lineker because he's absolutely toilet. Like, I've referenced him a few times. I thought, I actually really don't like Gary Lineker. So I don't know why I've given him airtime on this pod. So Gary Lineker, if you're listening, please don't listen anymore. But yeah, no, you are right though. It's just a lot of people that work for these companies, you know, they believe they're not part of the problem. They're all there like, yeah, so see you later. But it's like, you're part of the problem. Like, how can you not see that? You got Gary Lineker, you got Jamie Carragher, all of the Sky guys popping up being like, yeah, it's great. Jermaine Genius is another one. Even though, to be fair, he is on BT or not BT. Yeah, he's on BT, isn't he? But it's just
Yeah,
that
he is. Yeah.
that's part of it, isn't it? Is that I think a lot of fans have been duped by we've defeated this huge monster, but secretly, a lot of football now is for those that can afford, and it's not really for everyone, which is a shame.
Fans need to look at their clubs and look at their leagues. Like a lot of people are criticizing Sky, and I do agree with that. Sky are part of the problem, but who's at the end of the day, who's selling the rights to Sky? The Premier League, and
Yeah,
who's the Premier League made up of? Its founding members. It's your
yeah,
club that is ultimately doing this, and the Premier League coming out and saying, "Oh yeah, this is against the kind of the ethics or the values of football." Well, you weren't saying that when you formed the Premier League and sold the rights to Sky for several billion pounds. It's just nonsense. I just find it like I just find it nonsense. I'm gonna start crying on the pod.
yeah. I think you are,
First tears
mate. Yeah,
shed.
but I mean, don't worry about it, mate. Obviously, Sunderland will become a superpower sometime soon, so it
That is very true. Very true.
wasn't really relevant to anything you just said, but I just thought that'd make you feel. I thought it'd make you feel better.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, on that note, before I burst into even more tears, let's wrap up there. Thank you, Etches, for the information this week. I thought it was a really interesting discussion on this issue of the ESL and just wider financial inequality in football and whether or not the game is still there for the working class. But yeah, well, I guess we'll never really know. We'll never find out. But hopefully, football will change for the better. But yeah, thank you all guys for listening this week, and we'll see you next time.
Brilliant. Cheers, guys.